Lost Origin comes out. It's literally right around the corner. So today we're going to be talking about the cards that you, if you're not buying, at the very least need to know about. Hey, Nick from 9Card TCG, and today we are going to be not necessarily reviewing the entirety of the set Lost Origin, which, by the way, does officially release on September 9th. We are going to be going over some of the biggest or the best cards, or what we think might be the biggest and best cards from this set. The ones that you might want to get your hands on, whether it's just one or two or a full playset, or if you're not looking to purchase or just kind of see what's going to be popular. I think that's really important. Obviously, there is, if you haven't already seen the set list or whatever, we're going to be looking at it, so big spoilers for the set. I'm going to try not to show, like, the character res and the full arts. I can't guarantee it, so I'm going to, but, you know, I'll try at the very least. But, yeah, before we get into the actual, you know, the cards you need to know about, do me a favor. Hit the like button, subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. Let me know in the comments below which deck you or the cards you're most looking forward to, whether it's something from the training gallery or just a new V-Star VMAX that you really want to pick up. I know what I'm going to be trying to get. I know what exactly the cards I'm looking for, so I'm going to tear into that booster box and hope that I get a bunch of uncommons and rares, kind of for the first time in my life. But anyway, let's head over to Serebii.net, where we can... Is it .net? Is it Serebii.net? It is Serebii.net. Wow. Anyway, going over to Serebii, and we're going to take a look at the full set list. Link, by the way, in the video description, so be sure to check it out. Who doesn't know about Serebii at this point? Come on. So here we go, Lost Origin. You can see the set symbol is right there. Almost looks like a helmet, right? Like a samurai helmet, or interestingly enough, called a kabuto. Definitely, my accent is god awful, but you know, there's a kabuto. Anyway, it means like helmet or head, something like that. Vileplume could be interesting. I'm not really expecting much from it at the stage 2. Parasect, on the other hand, is a little bit interesting, whereas this is the Parasect. It's not showing because my computer's taking 1,000 years to load, but basically, since it doesn't want to load the picture, we're just going to read the ability. To stage 1, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may use the ability. Both active Pokemon are now poisoned and asleep. Why would we ever want to do this? Well, Electrode V is a card that can attack for free and does damage based on the number of status conditions that it has. So you can put it to sleep and poison it, and now you're going to be able to, attack for free. And you have something like Mechanical Arm that allows you to attack through a sleep and paralysis. So it doesn't even matter. You will take 10 damage, but Electrode V doesn't have a lot of health, so we don't really care that much to begin with. Moving on, for the rest of these, nothing here is particularly interesting. I know, who is it? Is it Greg? Greg from It's Super Effective podcast loves Roselia and Roserade, so there will be a new Roserade card for him to use if if they are interested in playing the TCG. Trevenant's one that we should also talk about. Old Tree Barrier, again, another stage 1, but between like Zorua and Zoroark and a bunch of other things, we can kind of make these things work. If this Pokemon is knocked out by damage from one of your opponent Pokemon V attacks, your opponent doesn't take a prize card. Now, it has 150 health. It has 120 HP, which is not good because Aqua Bullet on Shady Dealings and Teleon, which by the way is still pretty popular. It's not a Pokemon V. It's going to one-shot you, and your opponent will take a prize then. How often you could be doing this isn't... I don't think it's super sustainable, so I don't really care too much. Chandelure, I remember reading and thinking it's something. Once during your turn, when you play this card from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon, you may discard the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck. Does Lampent do something similar? No, it does not. Now, that could have been interesting if Lampent also was going to discard cards, and then you can evolve from, Litwick into Lampent and discard, mill 1 or 2 cards, and then you go into Chandelure and discard 3 cards. That could have been a thing, and you can kind of pair it with Scoop Up Nets and just constantly be milling your opponent's deck, but it doesn't work like that, unfortunately, so not something I'm particularly interested in, especially on a stage 2. Our first V that we're going to be looking at is, of course, Delphox V Spooky Torch. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now burned and confused. Not a terrible attack if you don't have a choice for a single fire energy. You can do a little bit of chip damage and also confuse them. Maybe they fail to attack. Most of the time, they're just going to evolve out of it anyway, so it doesn't really matter too much, but it's better than just passing for turn. Magical Fire is the attack we are interested in for 2 fire and a colorless. Put 2 energy cards attached to this Pokemon in the Lost Zone. This attack does 120 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, plus it does 120 to the active. So you could be doing really good damage. It's similar to a Gmax Rapid Flow. You're limited onto where you can put the damage. You can only put 120 onto one bench Pokemon. The other has to go onto the active. So not as good as Gmax Rapid Flow. You're not discarding all 3 energy, but you are putting 2 into the Lost Zone. This may not be the worst thing in the world if you're pairing it with something like Cramorant that can come in and do chip damage for free if you have 4 or more cards in the Lost Zone. Pairing it with something like Sableye that does damage based on the Lost Zone. Mirage Gate. There's some things we can do. At the moment, there's no Delphox V Star, so it's going to stay 210 health. Palkia is going to be able to annihilate this thing, and Palkia is pretty popular. Arceus V Star with the Choice Belt and DTE will one-shot it, so probably not the most viable thing. There's something about this Politoed, Poliwhirl, Politoed thing that does damage based on a number of Poliwags and Poliwhirls and Poliwraths and stuff, and it's whatever. Dewgong, though, is a little bit interesting because it has Swim Freely. Flip a coin if heads, prevent all effects of attacks done to this Pokemon during your opponent's next turn. And you can pair this with something like Glimwood Tangle that lets you re-flip coins if you want. Arctic Return, 2 colorless energy, shuffle any number of water energy from your Pokemon back into your deck, and this attack does 40 damage for each energy shuffle display. So you have a decent amount of energies in play. You can hit kind of hard. If you have 5 energies in play, 5 times 40, you're hitting for 200. So you can get into that, especially with a Choice Belt. Now you're hitting into the 230 range, which is knocking out Vs with a single prize. Not terrible by any means. There is some type of control deck, I'm sure, that will use the Swim Freely to prevent damage, all that kind of stuff, but we'll have to see if it's anything special. Kingdra has the Surging Current. Once during your turn, you may choose either you or your opponent. The chosen player shuffles their hand and puts it at the bottom of their deck, and then draws 4 cards. It's a one-sided Marnie, but you get to choose which one, which is really cool because sometimes you have things that you don't necessarily want to get rid of, but your opponent has a big hand, or maybe they search for something last turn, and they scooped up Net and Teleon, like, well, I don't want them to use that next turn. I'm just going to put it to the bottom of their deck, force them to find it. Surging Current can be really cool. Plus, you have a pretty good attack in Hydro Splash for just a single water energy, does 130. That's not that bad. It is a stage 2, so something to consider, but if you can get it out, it might be something to kind of keep an eye on. Also, interestingly enough, is Finneon, something that I do think you should know. Ocean Accompaniment. As often as you like during your turn, you may attach a water energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon that has the Swim Freely attack. We already saw Dewgong has it. We know there are other Pokemon that have the Swim Freely. I just wanted to point out this this Finneon, because if you do plan on playing a Swim Freely deck, you absolutely need the Finneons. Everything else that we've mentioned, you don't really need. It's just kind of interesting. Maybe if you're going to play an Electro deck, you want to get the Parasect because it puts the poison on you and it puts you to sleep. But everything else, you really don't need. We're finally going to come into some cards that you are absolutely going to see and cards that you may want to pick up depending on. It's hard to give counts depending on what type of deck you're playing, but Kyurem V, I think I said that right, Instant Freeze. Attach any number of water energies from your hand to your Pokemon in play, and that is just for a single water energy. So if you're going second, you can Melony onto this thing, and then if you have a bunch of energies in hand, you can Capacious Bucket once or twice, whatever. You're going to just attach all those energies to any of your Pokemon. Pokemon V, V-Star, single prize Pokemon, it does not matter. And then Frost Smash does 140 for 3. We're really just looking to use the Instant Freeze on this thing. It's the V Max that's going to really seal the deal for us in terms of how good this kind of card is. Ice World. Once during your turn, you may discard the top card of your deck. If it's a water energy, attach it to one of your Pokemon. That's really solid because you can use things like Rotom Phone, you can use things like Orangurus Primate Wisdom to put those cards at the top of your deck. And then if you have more than one Kyurem VMAX or in play, you can use Ice World multiple times. I do feel like this is not very large. It might be a little hard to read since you don't get to see the picture of the Pokemon anyway, right? Like, might as well make it easy to read. Anyway, you will definitely be seeing this card if you're playing. You can play Kyurem on its own. You can pair it with Palkia. That's probably the way it's going to be going. So expect to see it. And if you aren't playing Palkia or Kyurem, you obviously don't need to pick it up, but you should know what it does. The next card that you absolutely have to know what it does, because you will be seeing it, is Cramorant. Lost Supply. If you have 4 more cards in the Lost Zone, ignore all energy in this Pokemon's attack cost. And then Conniving Spit hits for 110, and it's not affected by weakness, which is fine, because we're not really looking to knock things out. And there's also not a ton of fire in the format. Yes, it'd be really cool to use this to knock out a Radiant Charizard, something like that, but, you know, just being able to put chip damage onto a V-Star, being able to knock out a Sobble, a Comfey, something like that, really, really useful. This is so much better. This is so much better to see. There's a cute Pikachu. The Raichu looks nice. Magnezone V and V-Star, they're fine. Pulling Magnetism for a Lightning and a Color, switch one of your opponent's bench Pokemon with their active, and it does 40 damage to the new active Pokemon, which is interesting because you can pull a Sobble from your opponent's bench and hit them with Pulling Magnetism for 80 damage and take a KO, as opposed to the 40 that you would do to whatever is in the active, assuming it's not weak to Lightning. Splitting Beam does 30 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon and 90 to the active. That's a Lightning double colorless. It's always nice to see the double colorless, which means we could pair this with the Pokemon of another type. We can attach a DTE. Pretty good, but you know, you're only hitting 180, which without a choice belt isn't enough to knock out something that's even weak to Lightning. So not crazy about the V, but the V-Star Magnet Grip. Search your deck for up to two item cards, reveal them, put them in your hand, and then shuffle your deck. For that same Lightning double colorless, hits 180, which means you will be knocking out Lightning weak VMAXs and V-Stars. Electrostar does 90 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. That is your V-Star for double Lightning. How is this better than Gmax Rapid Flow? Like, sure, you get to keep the energy, but you can only do it once, and it's only to the bench, and it's also only 90. So, not really crazy about it. Like, why would you ever use this over something like Starbirth, unless you happen to get really lucky and you go first and you attach an energy, a Lightning energy, then your opponent goes and they have 2 Comfeys. But it doesn't even work because you can't deal damage to the active, so you can knock out a Comfey or 2 on the bench, but that's it. And it just doesn't, I just don't really care for it. Rotom is another one that still not super crazy about. Impromptu Electrify. Once your turn, you may draw 3 cards. If you do, your turn ends. Scrap Shot does attack, does 41 damage for each Pokemon tool in the Lost Zone. No, how many tools do you really think you're playing? So, come on. A card that will see a bunch of play, I guarantee it, is Gengar. Gengar with the Creeping Back ability. I do think it's called something else officially in English, but I don't remember what it is. Once during your turn, I think it's Netherworld Gate? Netherworld Gate, I think, sounds right. Once during your turn, you may put this card from your discard pile onto your bench. If you do, put 3 damage counters on this Pokemon. There are 3 decks max that really like this, but the ones that like it really like it for a couple of reasons. One, you don't need the Haunter and Gengar, so you don't have to fill up deck space to get Gengar into play. 2, you get to get it from the discard to the bench. Torterra wants evolution Pokemon in play. Doesn't care how those evolution Pokemon get there, they just need to be in play. Gengar is an evolution Pokemon, so creeping back does help something like Torterra. It also helps Machamp VMAX, or V and VMAX, which does more damage if you have Pokemon on your bench with damage counters. So now you can use creeping back to get damage counters onto a Pokemon consistently, because it's not anything that your opponent does. They don't have to attack. You don't have to worry about having Gape Draw Bog in play. You just have to get a single Gengar into the discard and then constantly bring it back if you need. So really good way there. And then of course Hisuian Zoroark V-Star, which does damage based on the number of Pokemon you have in play with damage counters on them. Creeping back is a great way to do it. I'm going to pair this with another card we're going to talk about soon. Another card that you will see the next 2, Radiant Gardevoir, is the best Radiant Pokemon from the set. Devotion Veil. Your Pokemon takes 20 less damage from your opponent's Pokemon V attacks. We don't really care about the attack Psychic. It can be an okay attack, I guess, but we're really using it for the damage reduction. Things like Goodra and Arceus and Teleon, at least more defensive versions of those decks, love things like this. Anything that is wall, stall, heal is absolutely going to enjoy Radiant Gardevoir. You can only have 1 Radiant Pokemon in the deck, so if you're going to, unless you're playing multiple decks that would use Radiant Gardevoir, you only need 1. Sableye is an interesting, it is a holo rare, so this is one of the first rares, and Cramorant's also a rare, but it's not a holo. So we do need some rares depending on the deck that we're building. And the attack here is Lost Mine. This attack can only be used when there are 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone. Place 12 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way you like. Oh boy, that's insane. That is so strong. Being able to just put 120 damage anywhere. Your opponent has 2 Sobbles, gone. Your opponent has, a Drizzile, and you want to put the last 3 damage counters onto a Crobat V, you're taking 3 prizes. Like, there's so many ways you can use this, whether it's to finish off Pokemon that have already been damaged on the bench, or you want to soften up something for an attack the next turn, and you're only giving up a single prize Pokemon. Now, yes, of course you have to have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, but honestly, not that hard to do with things like Comfey, which Comfey is probably one of the best cards in the set. You have to know it, and I would definitely recommend picking up a few, because at some point you're going to want to play a Lost Zone deck, most likely. Flower picking, or as it's sadly called in English, flower selecting. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand, the other in the Lost Zone. If you have 4 Comfeys in play, you can cycle through all 4 Comfeys and use flower picking 4 times. Scoop Up Net and things like that allow you to reuse them again. So even if you don't have 4 Comfeys, if you have 2 Comfeys and ways to switch and Scoop Up Net and all that kind of stuff, you can use them multiple times. And you pair it with something like Colress, which puts 2 more cards in the Lost Zone. It's very easy to get 4 cards in the Lost Zone. Your first turn going second, which means now you're able to hit with Cramorant, and then you're almost halfway there for Sableye's big attack. So definitely learn Comfey. Hisuian Arcanine. Guard down if you have no cards in your hand. This attack does 150 more damage. It does base 10, so you're hitting 160. It's a fighting type, so you can... You're knocking out Arceus V-Stars, you're knocking out anything that's fighting weak pretty easily. It's no energy, it's really good. In English, this attack is called Very Vulnerable. I don't really like it because you have to have no cards in your hand. Now you can pair this with Radiant Venusaur, which after you attack, you get to draw until you have 4 cards in your hand. But then you have to discard all of those cards in order to do the extra damage with Guard Down or Very Vulnerable. Otherwise, you're stuck using Sharp Fang, which is arguably, or is just way worse. We'll talk about Machamp. It's a promo card. It's pretty interesting. Crisis Muscle, if your opponent has 3 or fewer prizes remaining, Pokemon gets an extra 150 health, which means you have a single prize Pokemon with 300 HP. Absolutely crazy. You do get the hit for 100 damage for just 2 fighting energies, and that's really not that hard to do, especially on a stage 2. And you can have this attack deal 100 more damage, and if you do, there's a Pokemon can attack during your next turn. Now, that's not really that big of a deal, because with things like Scoop Up Nets and Switch and Escape Ropes and things, we can very easily get this Pokemon to the bench and back into the active to reset that caveat of not being able to attack the next turn. We can also go ahead and Scoop Up Net and then evolve a fresh Machoke into Machamp, and now it's 300 health, and yeah, knocking out a 300 health single prize Pokemon does not feel good. So this will be really, really solid in something like Gym Leader Challenge, and if you can make it work in Standard, I do think it might be a little slow being a Stage 2, but worth noting nonetheless. Aerodactyl V. We don't really care about the V, I'm not gonna lie. It's there, 210 health. Bite is not that good. Rock Crush is okay if you go second and somehow miss the V-Star. You can discard an energy from your opponent's active. Maybe that does something, but 120, really no one cares about. We are interested in the V-Star, though, because the V-Star has an interesting attack. Lost Dive, put the top 3 cards of your deck in the Lost Zone, so you are going to mill yourself, but you're doing 240, so you're knocking out Vs pretty consistently. And you can use things like Mirage Gate and Cramorant and all these other cards to take use of the fact that you're going to be Lost Zoning your deck. You also have a V-Star Power Ancient Star, 1 colorless energy. As long as this Pokemon in play, it gains the ability with the effect your opponent's Pokemon V in play, excluding Aerodactyl V-Star, have no abilities. So you can really lock down your opponent's Pokemon. You use Ancient Star, now they can't Starbirth, they can't use Star Portal as long as the thing's in play. So it's not something now as simple as, oh, I'm just going to go ahead and Drizzile Shady Dealings for Training Court to bump your path, and now I can use my abilities. No, now they gotta knock out this Aerodactyl, and it does have 260 health. You can absolutely throw Lake Acuity in there so that your opponent does less damage. You can put Radiant Gardevoir in there so that your opponent does less damage. You can utilize something like Fantina because you are Lost Zoning cards. Your opponent's going to do less damage, so you can very easily make this kind of like a wall stall deck and then just be constantly hitting for 240. You do have to worry about milling yourself, but honestly, not bad. Something I'm a little interested in. Drapion V, we're going to talk about, but not really the V-Star. I don't think the V-Star is really anything interesting, but Wild Style is Drapion V's ability, and for each Pokemon Single Strike, Fusion Strike, or Rapid Strike that your opponent has in play, this attack cost is 1 colorless less, which means if they have, you're playing Mew, they only run Fusion Strike Pokemon, maybe a Pumpkaboo, but they're going to have at minimum 4-5 Fusion Strike Pokemon in play. That's just what Mew has to do. And now Dynamic Tail, you attack for free. You hit for 190, which means you're one-shotting a VMAX. You do have to do 60 damage to one of your Pokemon. Does not matter which one. You could choose Drapion V. You can choose another one of your Pokemon. Does not matter which one. But you do have to put that 60 damage somewhere. Now, this does count for Rapid Strike Pokemon. So you're playing against the Palkia, you're playing against Inteleon, or Arceus. They have to be careful about the number of Rapid Strike Sobbles they play, which means they either have to limit the number of Sobbles or worry about Dynamic Tail coming in Choice Belt knocking out a V, or they don't use the Rapid Strike Sobble anymore, so they won't be able to use Keep Calling to go ahead and get more. So some decisions that have to be made depending on how frequently Drapion V sees play. Might as well talk about the V-Star. Big Bang Arms, its stack does 10 less damage for each damage counter on this Pokemon. Base 250. For 2 Dark and Colorless, it's really not that good. Why would you ever want to do this? Star Hazard, once per turn, you may make your opponent's active Pokemon poisoned and paralyzed. Put 3 damage counters on it instead of 1. You can use Radiant Sneasler to make that 5 damage counters, and you can use Toxicroaks to increase it by 2 for each stage 1 Toxicroak you have. It's just, why would you want to use your V-Star power to poison a Pokemon. It just, yeah, okay, fine, you get to paralyze him too, but like, it just doesn't seem that worth it, especially because our attack is really not that good. So maybe we use, I don't know, I don't like it. Enamor's V is a card, Poliwrath is a card. I don't think you're going to see them very, very much. We'll continue down. Some of these cards do have Lost Zone effects. I'm not really... Radiant, Hisuian, Sneasel, you put extra poison counters. What is it? Two more poison counters on your opponent's Pokemon. Cool. No one really cares. Steelix is a little interesting. The Steelix does do something kind of interesting. So maybe you'll see it in some like meme decks. You get attached up to 2 energy, mental energy from your discard to this Pokemon. Sure, it's probably going to get knocked out the following turn, so why do that? Finishing Rend, discard the cards from the top of your deck until you have just 1 remaining. And it does 30 more damage for each energy you discard this way. So it does base 60 plus 30 for each energy you discard with Finishing Rend. Could be really cool. Pair it with Volcarona V, single fire energy, and you do damage based on energies you have in the discard pile. And then you can, shuffle those energies back into the deck so you don't deck out. But Finishing Rend could be used somehow, some way, in maybe like a Dialga deck or something else that uses metal energy. Hisuian Zoroark V-Star, we're just going to assume if you're getting the V-Star for a deck that you need the V, so we're not going to cover it. Phantom Star is our ability. It is Professor's Research, discard your hand, draw 7 cards. Really, really good. Baneful Curse, for a double turbo energy, you get to do 50 damage for each Pokemon you have in play with damage counters on it. We already talked about the Gengar. We already talked about Gate Draw Bog from Astral Radiance that does an additional, whenever you play a basic Pokemon, it takes 20 damage. So you just can pretty quickly stack the field with Pokemon that have damage counters. But there is another way that we can get damage counters on the Pokemon. But it is worth noting that Zoroark V-Star, if you have 6 Pokemon in play with damage counters plus a choice belt, you're hitting 330, that you're one-shotting a VMAX. Double Turbo Energy does reduce it by 20, so keep your math clean. Make sure you know what your math is. Ariza was interesting a little bit. You can get up to 3 evolution Pokemon that don't have a rule box, reveal them and put them into your hand, shuffle your deck. It's like inverse Adventurer's Discovery. Adventurer's Discovery lets you get 3 V Pokemon. This is specifically evolution that is not V. Box of Disaster, I don't think anyone cares about. Call versus Experiment. If you're not going to play a Lost Zone deck, you don't need to buy it, but you have to know this card. Look at the top 5 cards of your deck. Put 3 of them in your hand, 2 in the Lost Zone. Very, very solid. It doesn't seem like anything special, but it's very useful in Lost Zone decks. Damage Pump lets you move 2 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to your other Pokemon in any way you like. And now that's really important before Gengar and Zoroark. If something takes damage, well, you can just damage pump 2 off of it and put them onto other Pokemon so that you're hitting with max damage for or with the Baleful Curse. We did skip Hisuian Goodra here, which is a little interesting. Steal, Shelter, ignore all damage by your opponent's Pokemon V attacks to your basic Pokemon that have any metal energy attached. And the first thing that comes to mind is Arceus can do this. What's it called? The Aggron V can take use of this. Genesect can take use of this. So some interesting stuff. You're not being able to deal damage to something like a Genesect V because it has a Fusion Strike energy. Yes, this is a Stage 2 Pokemon, but Genesect lets you draw through your deck so heavily that it might be a thing. We do also have a Hisuian Goodra V and V-Star, and I want to talk about the V because it does have an interesting attack in Toppling Goo. For a water and a metal energy, your opponent switches their active Pokemon with one of their benched. It's a free way to get Pokemon moved around and maybe kind of stall out a turn, and you're doing 60 damage to the active in the process. Shell Rollout, Water Metal Colorless, does 140, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less from attacks. But the V-Star, same attack cost, Water Metal Energy, Water Metal Colorless, does 200 damage, and during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 80 less damage from attacks. My goodness, you pair this with Lake Acuity, and you pair this with Gardevoir and Fantina cards. Some of them we haven't talked about yet, but there's ways you can get up to 240 less damage taken with this Pokemon. And then Moisture Star to just heal it all away. Your opponent is chipping away slowly at your Goodras, and you just heal it all away and make them do it again. It is absolutely brutal. Pidgeot V has the Vanishing Wings ability. Once during your turn, this Pokemon is on your bench. You may shuffle this Pokemon and all cards attached to it back into your deck. That's pretty much what the ability is going to be used for. It's going to be used for some type of control deck and force you to not deck out, but that's pretty much it. Back to our trainers. I did forget about those cards. So now over to Fantina. You may only use this card if you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone during your opponent's next turn. Your Pokemon take 120 less damage from your opponent's Pokemon V's attacks. Come on, so Goodra does minus 80, Fantina makes you take an extra 120 less, you're doing 200 less damage, Gardevoir lets you take an extra 20, that's 220 damage that you're not taking, plus one more thing, there's actually two more things we can do, but we're really only going to focus on one of them. Oh my goodness, how did we miss Giratina V and V-Star? These are so good. Giratina V, Abyss Seeker with the top 4 cards of your deck, put 2 of them in your hand, the rest in the Lost Zone. Pretty good attack going second if you're not able to attack with Shred, which does 160 for Grass Psychic Colorless. Not affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. You just hit through Miltanks, you hit through whatever. It's really solid. But the V-Star is brutal. Lost Impact for Grass Psychic Colorless does 280, just one-shotting Pokemon left and right. It's insane. 2 energy have to go to the Lost Zone, though. And there could be 2 energy from anywhere. It could be 1 double turbo energy. That's technically 2 energy. But you can get 2 energy cards, put them into the Lost Zone, and now, between things like Colress and Comfey, you hit that 10 threshold pretty quickly, which is important because Star Requiem, if you're able to attack with Lost Impact, you're able to attack with Star Requiem. If you have 10 or more cards in the Lost Zone, your opponent's active Pokemon is just knocked out, which, even if your opponent's Goodra is taking 240 less damage, which means Lost Impact would only do 40, it does not matter. Star Requiem just obliterates it, and it's gone. It's knocked out. Insane. That is your V-Star power, so you can only use once per game, but it can just outright win you the game. Lake Acuity is a stadium card. Pokemon with fighting or water type energy attached to it take 20 less damage. Lost Vacuum is really interesting. Discard or send a card from your hand to the Lost Zone, and then you can take a tool or a stadium, yours or your opponent's, and put it into the Lost Zone. Mirage Gate, fantastic card. You can only play this card if you have 7 or more cards in the Lost Zone. Search your deck for 2 basic energy of different types, and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you want. Really good way of accelerating energies for something like Giratina, Goodra, other cards, things like that. Volo is an interesting supporter because it lets you discard a Pokemon V from play, so you don't have to worry about your Crobat being a liability anymore, your Lumineon you just discard it. Wind Up Arm or Mechanical Arm lets you attack through paralysis. It's a tool, lets you attack through sleep. It's really just for Electrode V, which we didn't talk about, I don't think, but there it is. Tantrum Blast, 100 damage for each special condition affecting this Pokemon. It's a free energy, and there we go. It's just, why not? If you pull them, I guess, but 210 health, it is weak to fire. The fire weakness isn't that big a deal. The only thing you have to worry about is Radiant Charizard, but most things will knock you out. Palkia is going to knock you out pretty easily. Something like Arceus V-Star is going to knock you out pretty easily. Iron Rollout is going to put you at 10 damage, and if you're poisoning and burning yourself, you're going to have that chip damage is going to end up KOing you anyway. So, something to keep in mind, but yeah. So there you have it, every single card that you might want to look to buy, or at the very least, if you're not going to buy them, just know they exist, know the important cards, what to look out for during play. If I missed one, let me know in the comments below, but that is going to do it for us today. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, found it so informative, and like, subscribe, comment, and I will see you next time.